Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out this evening. I actually do have a tie. I have 63, actually. 3 years ago, when I retired from my other job in TV, where I was a little more on screen, I decided that I would wear ties less and less after wearing them from kindergarten straight through. So I apologize for not wearing a tie. I feel a little underdressed. And you'll find my poppy out in the parking lot somewhere between...
Mine's out there too.
Yeah, between where I parked in the back and walked up to the front. That's the third one in 2 days. In the meantime, once again, thank you for coming out this evening. I do appreciate you taking the time to discuss what we discuss at VOCM a fair bit. We have quite a bit of airtime devoted to discussion about public policy. Sometimes people listen, sometimes people don't. But at least it gets the discussion going. So anytime there's an opportunity to move the ball down the field, if you will, it's always, a good idea to get these issues out in the forefront, discuss them, and maybe come up with some new ideas that haven't been thought of before. The folks who are here this evening, no strangers to many of you who are in the room, but I will introduce them, a very brief introduction. They're all going to give you their opening remarks in a minute, and I'll just tell you a little bit about how the evening is going to go. Each person here at the table will get a chance to get up and give opening remarks, and then there's going to be a debate among the panelists for the issues that have come up throughout the evening for about 20-25 minutes. After that, there will be questions from the audience. So because there's going to be a pretty good stretch between the time you may hear, say, Richard speak and the time you'll get to ask a question, perhaps jot it down or put it in your phone, whatever, so that you can remember to ask it. There will be somebody with a microphone going around the room. So once that portion of the evening comes, we will give you an opportunity to speak into the mic and ask your question to the panelists, or just pose something that you want to debate with them yourselves. Following that, of course, there will be closing remarks from each of the people who you see before you tonight. And I'm going to introduce them, starting with Richard on my left. Richard Alexander is the Executive Director of the Employers Council. Mary Shortall is the President of the Federation of Labor. Karen Olford is the President of the Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador. Richard Vaughan is Vaughan Hammond is the Director of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and Richard Alexander is this is all in different order here.
That's all right. Call them whatever you want.
Richard Alexander is the Executive Director of the Employers Council, so thank you all very much for coming this evening. Jerry Earle is the President of NAPE. I went back to the top again just to make sure my notes were there. My apologies. So thank you all for coming. The order of speakers, we begin with Richard Alexander. Mr. Alexander?
Perfect. Thanks very much, Fred. Good evening, class. Yeah, when Dr. Locke told me I had to speak for 2.5 hours, I said, boy, this is going to be hard to come up with that much material. But then he told me a couple days ago that I only had to do 12 minutes. So here we go, 12 minutes. As Fred said, my name is Richard Alexander. I'm the Executive Director of the Newfoundland and Labrador Employers Council. We're a business advocacy organization. We're a provincial organization that represents business from all sectors of the economy in all regions of the province, everywhere from Lab City to downtown St. John's. We advocate for business on a number of different issues, and there's a number of different issues that I could have chosen to speak with you about tonight. Things like immigration, labor market development. These things, quite frankly, would have been much more enjoyable for me to talk about, much more positive. But the reality is talking about those things tonight would be a little bit like talking about what color to paint the house when the kitchen is on fire, right? Yes, we need to paint the house, but let's put that fire out in the kitchen first. Right? So the issue that I'm going to talk to you about tonight, the public policy issue I'm going to talk to you about tonight is our fiscal crisis. So before I do that, thanks to Dr. Locke, Dr. Lynch, Dr. May for organizing and providing this opportunity for us to speak here tonight. And my fellow panelists, this is challenging for people to come up here and put themselves in the hot seat, so thank you. And in particular, Mary and Jerry. I've known them for quite some time, and we've had these debates many times, and this is a very difficult situation that we find ourselves in this province, and it's particularly challenging for them, so I appreciate you folks being here to share your perspective, and to you folks for caring enough about the future of our province and public policy to actually take time out to share in this discussion, so thank you. I'm going to tell you a little story, or a little anecdote. I want you to think about your paycheck. Okay? And if you're like most of us, your paycheck or your expenses, your day-to-day expenses, have risen to the point where it pretty much consumes all of your paycheck, right? If you're like most of us. Then one day I want you to imagine that you walk into your place of employment and your employer gives you a bonus, a big fat bonus. You have a choice to make. What do you do with that bonus? Do you pay down some of your debt, or do you buy a new car? Right? These are the choices that you would have to make. So the year after that, you get the bonus again, and the year after that, you get it again, and again, and again. I bet you that eventually your expenses will grow to include that bonus as just a matter of fact. Right? That's how people operate. So then imagine that you walk in to your place of employment and things have changed. And your employer says, sorry, we have to cut your bonus. Your bonus is gone. Right? You're immediately not covering your expenses. You're going into debt. And something has to change. So what do? Do you go back to your employer and ask for a raise? Or do you reduce your expenses back to the point before you got that first bonus? Right? So why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story because it illustrates the history of our province's treasury over the last 10 years. Right? It also illustrates the end of the story that has to be written about the fiscal crisis that we have to deal with, and that our current government is getting ready to write for us. They've written part of it, but they're going to write the end of it over the next several years. Okay? So both the Premier and the Finance Minister have said we are in a fiscal crisis. So what does that mean, and why is it a fiscal crisis? Well, what it means in simple terms is that our government right now is spending billions of dollars more than they are taking in revenue. Right? Each of you in this room today owes about $27,000 in government debt, and that amount is increasing exponentially every month, every year. Right? This is a very serious situation. Make no mistake. So how do we get here? Quickly. Well, we got a bonus in this province with high oil prices, and over a 10-year period, our provincial government increased spending by 62%. Okay? $150 a barrel for oil is not normal, and it wasn't going to last forever, but our government did increase spending as if it was. We're spending things on good programs and services, so we spend more than other provinces on things like health and education, all the things that we'd want our governments to be spending on. Then we spend more than any other province in Canada per capita. We spend about $3,000 more per person than an average Atlantic Canadian province. And when you spend more on programs and services, you have to hire more people to administer those programs and services. So we do employ more per capita than any other province in Canada, and have for quite some time. What's different about us is not the fact that we employ more people per capita. What's also different is that at a time when other provinces were maintaining the size of their public service, or in some cases, some provinces were decreasing the size of their public service, becoming more efficient in the delivery of programs and services, we were increasing in size. We're unique in terms of provincial government employment numbers. So the thing about putting money into things like health and education, these are all good things. Right? But the conference board did a little analysis and just recently, and our premier talked about outcomes related to programs and services. So the conference board back in 2013 benchmarked us against other provinces to see how we're doing. And I'm going to take healthcare as just one example. So when you look at healthcare, they say that Newfoundland and Labrador healthcare system resources, they give us an A in comparison to other provinces. But when you look at the outcomes that we're achieving as a province, they're not terrible, but in comparison to other provinces, they gave us a score of D, right? So the reality is this. If a government's approach to trying to improve outcomes for citizens is just to increase funding and give the system more money, you're not guaranteeing better outcomes, right? That approach, sometimes all that does is guarantees a more expensive program or service. Okay? So budget 2016-17 was the current administration's attempt to work our way out of this, bring us out of this fiscal crisis. So what is budget 2016-17 known for? What did everybody get upset over? Taxes, right. So how much of an increase was there in taxes in the last budget? Take a guess. Throw it out there. I feel like I'm doing a lecture in university now. I like this a lot, actually. Raised all brackets and stuff like this. Well, the reality was that they came up with $882 million of additional fees and taxes tax increases. So $882 million. That account, what they've done is they've gone to the general public, you folks, and they've asked you to find about $3,000 to $7,000 more disposable income or find savings within your own budgets and give that to the province in taxes. Right? It's a fair sum. Right? Now, people will take a look at different taxes and say, okay, yes, we have the highest gas tax in Canada, but you know, we're competitive on personal income tax and all this stuff. The thing that people need to recognize about taxation is it all comes from the same wallet. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it a gas tax, HST, whatever. And when you add all these up, right now in Newfoundland and Labrador, you folks here have the highest personal tax burden of any province in Canada. We're either number one or we're tied for number one with Quebec, depending on what their budget is, what's going on with their budget, right? So there's no free lunch when it comes to taxation or even cuts, okay? There is a cost to this, and the cost is when you increase taxes, you can and you will reduce business investment. Business investment is future economic growth, it's future jobs, and you will impact that by increasing taxes. Right? The other thing that high taxes do, particularly high personal income personal taxes, is that it can drive people away. Right? This is a fact. Nobody, most people, I'd say 95% of the population, nobody wants to live in a province that pays the highest personal tax burden in Canada. Right? And so who is most likely to get up and leave, vote with their feet? It's our younger generation. Right? It's people that don't have their kids in school, and kids have friends, and they've got jobs, and they've been in there in a career, and they've got pensions and to pick up and leave. It's the younger generation. Right? They will vote with their feet. Right? And these are the people that we want to stay in Newfoundland and Labrador, because these are the future wage earners. These are the people that are going to help us pay off some of this debt that we're accumulating today. Okay? So there's a cost to this. So that's the expense side, or the revenue side. What about the expense side? How much was cut net from the last provincial budget in terms of government spending? We actually saw a $223 million increase in spending last year. Okay? This last budget was not a tax and cut austerity budget. It was a tax and spend budget. Right? Now, to government's credit, they have targets for spending reductions from now to the next 6 years. They are targeting a return to balance within 6 years. But this last budget was about taxation. Okay? So my next question for you is, did that tax increase, did that fix the fiscal crisis that we have? $900 million. Do we have a $900 million problem, or was the problem bigger than that? It didn't fix it. It didn't fix it. So right now, even with the tax increases, we're still running a deficit of $1.6 billion. This year alone, our provincial government is borrowing on your behalf, right? You're going to have to pay for this, $2.9 billion in borrowing just this year alone. Annual deficits are going to add up, increase our net debt to the point where our debt servicing is getting worse by the month and by the year. So if our provincial government achieves the targets that they've laid out within the next 6 to 7 years, we're going to be carrying about $16.5 billion in net debt, which is significant. This has led us, right now, in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have the highest, you folks have the highest personal tax burden, no, sorry, I'm reading the wrong slide, highest per person government debt in the country. So just compare where we are compared to our next closest one, which is Quebec. Right? There's a significant difference there. So this year, 16% of all revenues that the province is collecting is going to be spent on interest, just interest on debt. We spend more on interest in this province than we do on education. Interest on debt right now in Newfoundland and Labrador is crowding out what we spend on things like health and education. It is crippling our provincial treasury. Let me give you an example of how this is impacting our province right now. So I was at the finance minister's fiscal update last Thursday, and she talked about government had found $111 million of savings in programs and expenditures in programs and services. Absolutely fantastic. That's exactly what we want our government. At the same time, what they were budgeting in terms of interest on debt, there were some changes in actuarial projections and things like this, they lost $130 million. So they were $111 million to the good, and then they got pushed back $130 million. Right? We are on a debt servicing treadmill in this province. So taxes have increased. Debt is increasing rapidly at historic proportions. The only other option left is what? Reduce expenses. That's the only other option left. This is not a choice whether or not to reduce expenses. This is a fact. It has to happen. The only choice that we have as a province, and we're all in this together, the only choice is whether we do the cost reductions now or do we wait 7 years to do it. And I guarantee you, if you look at this, right, if we wait 7 years, the cuts that our government makes, the spending reductions, will have to be much more significant and much deeper and much more impactful than if they make those spending reductions today. That's the reality. So our government, as I said, has a 7-year plan. We're very positive about that plan. They've set some aggressive targets. We haven't seen the details of it, but hopefully in the Premier's vision document that's coming out soon, we should get some more details around that. But let me be clear. We are not advocating for government to come and slash and burn and gut the public sector. That's not what we're advocating for. Our campaign, as you've probably seen, it stopped now, but when it was going, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians for Big Government, we asked for those reductions in spending to be done through a focus on improving outcomes. We asked for investments in technology to improve access, particularly to folks that live in rural areas of the province. We asked for government to look at eliminating duplication and removing inefficiencies from our health system, as has been recommended by Newfoundland and Labrador Medical Association. And we asked government to consider regionalization of services, which has also been recommended by municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador. There's lots of ideas out there. Because if we don't reduce expenditures now, our government will come back to us again in the future, either this budget or the next one or the one after that, asking for more taxes. Okay? I'm not advocating, my organization is not advocating for a right-wing solution to this fiscal crisis. We're not advocating for a left-wing solution. We are advocating for a math solution, and that solution needs to happen now. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Richard. We're now going to hear from Jerry Earle, who is the president of NAPE. Mr. Earle, you have 12 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you, Fred, and also Dr. Locke for the invitation to participate this evening. I'm sure when you look at it, the title of tonight's event is interesting in itself, and I'm sure also when you look at the composition of the panel, you would suggest it's an interesting composition when you have business, labor, and community leaders discussing such an important topic as we have. I'm sure I can appreciate, too, that all of us have different views on this, and we certainly disagree. We don't see each of the same color lenses on all the issues. But with that said, I think I can speak for all of us when I say we share one special interest, and that special interest is our province. We are each passionate about this place we call home. It's part of the reason we do what we do. The bottom line, despite the challenges that we face, we are extremely lucky to call this place home, despite the current challenges. And if we do things right, we can improve our situation. It is important, I believe, that we must all work together to ensure that the province that we inherited, we leave it in a better shape. That is our shared responsibility, and that should be our guiding interest. A couple of issues I want to talk about, and we've talked about a fair bit in the public, is first of all, the people and the services that's delivered. And obviously being a public, and I'll stress private sector union leader, which I lead both of, I'm going to talk more about the public side of it for a moment. I've been president of NAPE now for just over a year. And in that amount of time, I've traveled over 100 communities across Newfoundland and Labrador. I've heard from countless workers, town councillors, concerned citizens, and representatives of various NGOs. It's easy to sit in a boardroom in St. John's or in a boardroom in Confederation Building and talk about and contemplating cuts and layoffs, office closures, or service reductions. But I can tell you it's an entirely different thing when you go out in the communities and you meet with the people that are impacted by these changes. And I'll just touch a couple that I've met over the past year. I was into Arbor Breton, where a woman talked about she'd worked all of her life for this province, and now she was being told that she was going to have to leave her community, relocate likely to St. John's, away from all of her family and her family home, because the last budget removed the dialysis unit that was in Arbor Breton that had only been put there 2 years previously. Then I went into Bonavista, and you heard the story was quite a public one, where a family was traumatized because their son was involved in a motor vehicle accident, could have been potentially life-threatening, and had to be transported an hour away for x-ray services, services that existed in the Bonavista Hospital just months prior that had been cut by the Springs budget. Then I went into another community in Botwood, where an elderly gentleman packed his wife into a car in the evening and brought her to Grand Falls because the clinic there had been closed as a result of the budget, because he was fearful that an ambulance would not arrive in time. I went on to the Northern Peninsula, and you talk about savings. I went into the community of Roddick and I spoke with a client service officer that have traveled 15,000 kilometers so far this year because the office in Port Saunders has been closed as a result of this budget. This is a woman that has to travel hundreds of kilometers and at excess cost to the public purse. And this is not to mention the workers who have lost their jobs, saw their offices shuttered, and it's easy to say that X amount of people equate to full-time equivalencies. And it's easy to say that in a press conference, but again, it's something different to go out and look those people in the eye, and I've done that in many cases when you hear women and men and families talk about not able to clothe their children or feed their children, how they're going to pay their bills. And I've listened to many of those stories, and I've heard some of them say, I got no alternative but consider leaving this province. And I can tell you there's very few that call Newfoundland and Labrador home that really want to leave. But the problem is when people leave, such as two of my children have had to do, they usually don't end up coming back. And we can look at all the graphs and all the numbers, and we can talk about full-time equivalents as much as we want, but I can tell you between every cut in service, there's someone that has their life impacted. And we have to look at the human element, and we must not lose sight of that in no matter what we have to do collectively or as a government. The next thing I want to touch on is we keep hearing about the public service and the size of the public service. And I've heard terms used such as the public service is bloated. Well, let me tell you about some of the public service that I represent and some of the comparators that I've heard alluded to. Yes, our province is facing difficult decisions in the coming months and years. However, we must ensure that we are dealing with the issues that we face in a reasonable and measured approach. We cannot make rash decisions because once they're often made, we cannot reverse them. We have a highly rural population, which is not often talked about when we compare. We have an aging population. We have poor health indicators. We struggle to attract and maintain immigrants. And then the recent decline in revenues and the deficit, to name but a few, are the more pressing and immediate challenges. So how do we tackle these problems? Well, I would argue it's not by cutting and slashing, but through a measured approach. We can't have where the medicine is worse than the cure. It's nothing new for conservative or neoliberal groups and organizations to advocate for the decimation of public services, wholesale layoffs, and privatization of public services. We've heard the term trim the fat, right size, streamline, and we've all heard the terminology, and it sounds fine on the surface. However, you must think about the absolute havoc that drastic cuts, layoffs would create in our province. Thousands of jobs gone. Or as I've heard some allude to, closed clinics, hospitals, offices, shut down public services, a massive increase in income equality, and a sharp increase in unemployment. Deep cuts to education and healthcare, and little to no opportunities for our youth to stay and work and thrive in this province. So again, I want to just dig a little bit deeper when we talk about the public services. We hear a comparison always to 2003 and to present. But one thing I'll remind you of, previous to 2003, the public service was cut to the bone. The muscle was removed. And again, I heard then there was no choice but to do that. So the public service of 2003 was a much shrunk public service. And I'll give you a couple of examples, because when we talk about the bloat in the public service now, we don't actually look at some of the factual information. One, for example, the creation of Child, Youth and Family Service in 2005. When it was created, it was in health and community services or under healthcare. It comprised of 660 people in that service, but now it's moved under core government. Nobody comes out and says, well, core government's increased because you took Child, Youth and Family Services from healthcare and moved it into core government, an invaluable public service. One that I do question is an increase in the Executive Council of 430 positions during that same time. 430 positions. That alone accounts for a difference of 1,000 positions, in core government. The recent budget itself talked about the elimination of 650 full-time equivalents. Well, as of today, we're trying to figure out actually how many women and men were affected, because full-time equivalents could actually affect 700, 800 women and men, and primarily women when I speak for the group that I represent. The numbers themselves don't tell the story of the impact of attrition on the workforce, the fact that it has essentially been an hiring freeze this year for all intensive purposes. 114 positions hired thus far this year, and believe it or not, only 24 of them permanent. So those numbers, again, are significant. And again, when you dig a little bit deeper, and I've been asking for this information, and sometimes the tipper is great because we're getting a lot of information that we couldn't get before. People talk about increasing. Well, I can tell you, believe it or not, there's been areas that have actually suffered reductions. Work, service, and transportation. The men and women that look after our highways and keep us safe and plow our roads, guess what? That service lost 200 positions. Advanced education and skills, a resource that you turn to when there's a downturn in the economy, when people are losing their jobs. They have lost 50 positions and actually seen offices closed in certain parts of Newfoundland, such as Port Saunders and Bell Island. Tourism, culture, and recreation, an area that we should be looking at and improving, believe it or not, lost 100 positions over that period of time. So again, when you look at it, the sheer numbers, you have to really dig into the numbers to see where those changes have taken place. Yes, we are a large and complex province. Our public service needs to be properly resourced to ensure the needs of the province are met to drive our economy and care for our people. And let me tell you, the public sector and the private sector are intertwined. Spending has a multiplier effect, creating jobs and infrastructure support necessary for a well-functioning economy. Simply put, public sector employment helps support private sector jobs. Public sector employees spend their money in the communities primarily where they live. They support the coffee shops and the local businesses. So we must be cognizant of the province ledger, I agree. We must not be so short-sighted as to cause long-term and lasting damage to our province via crippling into austerity. And a term I've often used and urge use is a hatchet is a poor tool to dig yourself out of a hole. And we've heard about austerity. Well, a broad range of leading economists, even the International Monetary Fund, which is not the most progressive of think tanks, have come to the conclusion that austerity policies do more harm than good. One need not look further than our past provincial budget. And a commentary made by the Royal Bank of Canada in the provincial 2016 outlook stated, despite a stable outlook for the oil production, the government's austerity budget and lower trajectory for investment spending will cause steady declines in the provincial GDP for the next 2 years, with knock-on implications for employment growth and the unemployment rate. On top of this, we must think about the disproportionate way in which austerity measures impact our province's most vulnerable, those that are disadvantaged. Income equality is a significant issue in this province. Indigenous people are affected, minorities are affected, vulnerable groups, and women more so than any other demographic. Another issue I just want to touch on again, because it's challenging sometimes for us because we represent, like I said, a public and a private sector union. But I want to talk about a second about a thing that we hear raised quite often as an alternative, and that's privatization. Well, I can tell you beneath the thin veneer of the buzzwords like collaboration, innovation, modernization, there's a clear agenda to cut public services, and who stands to benefit financially from such, I wonder. I can tell you who will lose from such arrangements. Sometimes we hear the cute and fuzzy terms that proponents of privatization being used in recent years called P3s. Well, again, sounds good on the surface, but when you really look closer, the evidence clearly exists across this country, across North America, and many European jurisdictions. Basically what P3s are, it's a commercial contract between government and private business to design, construct, finance, and operate public infrastructure services that have traditionally been delivered by the public sector. And in most every example, governments claim P3s work. We'll listen to what's been said, not far from us in many instances. Let's just talk about in Ontario, where the Auditor General there just a short while ago said had certain things been done in the public domain as they'd been before, it would have ended up saving the province $8 billion. $8 billion. P3s have largely been about private investors and companies dipping their hands in the public purse at the expense of taxpayers. Essentially, taxpayers and future governments are left holding the bank for projects that this government can take credit for today. And you talk about shifting the burden down the road, that's exactly what happens in this type of framework. And we can talk about it a little bit further later. Just want to talk about a couple of other areas and give you examples when we talk about P3s. Outside, we've seen some recent examples in relation to snow clearing. We have to go no further again than Ontario, where the Auditor General there said the roads now are less safe, takes twice as long to clear them, there is less salt and sand used, and there has been hundreds of investigations as a result of that move. Long-term care, which we've heard talked about right here in this province, again, let's look at the research that has been done, not commissioned by us, but has already been done. Research shows that staffing levels and hours of care are higher in public systems. Public facilities perform better than private on a range of quality and outcome measures, including rates of pressure ulcers, weight loss, nutrition, hydration, and restraint use. Over-medication is also an issue in the privatized side. A recent study of long-term care facilities in Ontario has found even again, fatalities and hospitalization was much higher. And again, we hear sometimes talk about the Liquor Corporation. Well, the Liquor Corporation in Newfoundland and Labrador in the last 5 years has brought in $700 million to the public purse to support such things as health and education and our communication and our road systems. We go to the province of Alberta, for example, where they privatize and they have foregone $1.5 billion in tax revenue. And this despite a per capita increase in alcohol consumption. I want to touch a minute on municipalities again, because recently the Columbia Institute Centre for Civic Governance latest report, which was backing out why local governments are bringing service home, says that across Canada and around the world, public services that we once outsourced are now finding their ways back home or back into communities. The very recent was in Port Hawkesbury, where they brought snow clearing back internal that was actually contracted out. We don't have to go any further than Conception Bay South, was actually brought garbage collection that was external back into their own domain. Put simply, privatization costs more and delivers less. When you put profit into the equation, something has to give. Usually that means less pay, poor quality of service, corners cut, and mistakes made. And I can tell you, don't have to go any further than what you've recently seen with the bus issues here in this area recently. Public safety can often be put at risk. Let me be clear, I am not against the private sector. I represent, as Mary represents, many workers in the private sector. A strong, vibrant, diversified, and properly supported private sector is absolutely critical to our economic and social well-being. However, we have to be very wary of the promises made and the cost analysis being used and the real impacts on privatization of terms of quality and closing public services. I've only scratched the surface and I just touched on those couple of areas because of the time frame. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure to participate.
Thank you, Mr. Earl. We're now going to hear from Karen Olford, who is the Mayor of Labrador City and as well the President of Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador.
And a little bit shorter. Well, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to represent the 276 municipalities of Newfoundland and Labrador, and thank you very much, Dr. Locke, for inviting me to be here. And I was happy to get out before we got our recent snowfall in Labrador West, which we're enjoying immensely. And I was on my skis just last weekend. My background is a registered nurse for over 30 years. I was also a primary healthcare nurse practitioner for about 10 years as well. And got involved in municipal politics because of wanting to be involved with healthy public policy in our province. And really that's the only way to have that impact is through events like this and through other, I guess, discussions that happen at tables around our province. I've lived through the boom and bust in Labrador West, and I can tell you it's much easier to govern at a time when things are good, when money is flowing like it was with the oil many years ago for the past 10 years. Much easier to govern when it's that way than when it is today with a $2 billion deficit. So really what I'm going to talk about is the new realities of local government and what we need to do if we're going to strengthen that level of government, which is the closest to the people. Municipal governments are the closest to the people in our province. Our communities are what create safe, caring places for families to want to live, work, and play. And we have to find a way to strengthen this level. So this is just a little fun fact. Local government was really only created as a way for the province to administer road rents. It wasn't created because municipalities or people in municipalities or areas of the province wanted to have an input into their destiny. It was created just as a way of funneling money. So the City of St. John's was first incorporated municipality in our province, and that was in 1888. And really, then it was 1915 before there was an act that granted local municipal boards greater authority over streets, bridges, and other local services. In 1937, the Local Administrative Act was passed, giving councils one sole source of taxation, property tax, which pretty much is where most municipal councils today still have and get most of their money. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Local government expanded during the 1950s and 60s, and the growth generated a provincial umbrella organization, new government institutions, and new adaptations of regional government. In 1951, Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador, then the Federation of Municipalities, was formed. And then the year after, government formed a new department called the Department of Municipal Affairs. Since its inception, municipalities have been a training ground for political participation at the federal and the provincial levels in our province. Today, there are 276 municipalities that I represent, which are 89% of the population. There are 332 communities then in our province who live outside of municipal boundaries. We have a province of just over 500,000 people. This doesn't make sense. That's 50,000 people who do not contribute to the roads, bridges, water systems, or sewer systems that keep our schools, hospitals, and businesses running. They also receive snow clearing and other road-related services from the provincial government for little or no cost. Including these communities within a regional government system means everybody will pay their fair share. It will also mean that 50,000 people will have a say in how municipal governments operate for the first time in their lives. And then we have the aging demographics. And we all know that right now in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have more people dying than being born. That's a very terrible statistic to have. And if we don't find a way to work together to increase our population, it does not bode well for our province and for our communities. Part of that demographics is showing on our councils. Fewer and fewer people are offering themselves for municipal elections. In 2013, only 45% of councils required an election. That means 55% had all of their seats filled either through acclamation or they didn't have enough people come forward to fill the seats on their council. The financial capacity to do the work that needs to be done simply cannot be generated from most local tax bases in these small communities. The vast majority of municipalities don't have the human resources or the technical wherewithal to do the things they know residents want. Of the 276 municipalities I represent, 74% of them have one or fewer employees. How can you get anything done, right? Especially when you're dealing with the bureaucracy of the provincial and federal government and you're trying to fit into programs to acquire funding for your various activities that happen from wastewater to clean drinking water to roads in your municipality. All of those avenues of generation of money require a lot of paperwork, a lot of technical expertise. And right now, many of our councils just don't have that. So this is just a little fun fact, make it lighten the mood a little bit. Does anybody know what the name of the community is that was once called Grand Falls Station? You got it. Windsor? It was Windsor. Yeah, Windsor.
I don't know if I'm supposed to be playing, I'm sorry.
It's okay, you played along, that's good. I was trying not to play along when you were asking your questions. So infrastructure, right now, we estimate that the collective infrastructure investment needed for replacing our aging drinking water systems alone is about $500 million in our province of 500,000 people. To implement new federal wastewater treatment regulations, which we're required to do under a federal government legislation, is another $400 million cost. We don't have $1 billion to do this work. There has to be a better way than having hundreds of small municipalities scrambling after not enough funding. Right now, we have no planning in most communities. So we need to start building stronger municipal governments. We need to have planning happening in these municipalities. We need more technical staff working for municipalities, and we need stronger revenue sources for municipalities. Property tax is just not working by itself. But more than that, we need people more engaged in how local decisions are made. We need councils with the capacity to reach out to residents in new ways. We need councils with the capacity to manage the increasingly complex web of regulations and to do so in the most transparent way possible. And I can tell you, having lived through the boom in Labrador West, where we have new mines that we're looking at springing up, and you're having to respond to environmental assessment reports on multi-million-dollar investments, billion-dollar investments, in fact, in our community. And yet you're looking at the long-term health of your community for 20 years. What's the air quality going to be like? Are we going to have clean drinking water? How are we going to make out with the vibration analysis? What's the dust in the air going to be? Are the residents going to be able to live here after this? What kind of mitigations we put in place? That's what our council was dealing with, right, during the boom period. And in order to, we were on our own. Provincial government did not step in to give us resources. We actually had to raise taxes at our community level, to hire consultants, to give us the expertise we needed to protect the environment for our residents for the future, so that we would continue to have a community, but still have economic development. Those are complexities that municipal councils deal with. Again, regionalization is the way forward. Communities need to take on the heavy lifting of infrastructure and planning and regulations so that they can focus on the day-to-day local needs of residents. And regional government is the way that we can do that. In 2015, the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation released a State of the Rural Canada report that after decades of neglect, it's time to reinvest in rural Canada. That report was funded by the International Network of Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Rural Canada is vital to the nation's economy. The report says, citing food production, resource extraction, energy generation, clean water and air, and carbon sequestering. But Canada has run down capital invested earlier in rural regions and has allowed community development to erode. We've lost all of our local service boards. We've lost all of our economic zonal boards that were out there helping communities to do this work in our province. Rural areas have also taken a backseat in policy development. Fundamentally, this report confirms that we have forgotten to invest in rural areas and small towns. Challenges in rural Canada include an aging population, workforce shortages, and gaps in human and financial capital. Rural Canada responds in innovative ways to low-cost global competition and is addressing such issues as sustainability, food security, and balancing resource development and economic diversification. Rural communities are reimagining themselves to fit the new aspirations and services needs, and they lead in reconciliation and wealth sharing with Aboriginal communities. Municipalities are too reliant on property tax. Property tax is regressive, meaning it does not adequately represent the ability of a householder to pay the tax. Municipalities need new sources of revenue to meet growing needs and take the pressure off the property tax system. Dr. Wade Locke's report on the municipal fiscal sustainability in 2011 said that too large a burden is being placed on the residential and commercial property tax base. To quote Dr. Locke, given the issue of sustainability being felt in Newfoundland municipalities, a discussion around municipal income tax and municipal sales taxes, when combined with an equalization program, represents an innovative tool for helping municipalities to deal with the significant problems that they are facing in today's economy. Succession planning is also very important. Realistically, small, single-staff municipalities, often with half-time or less workers, are not sustainable in the long run. With that said, amalgamation is not the solution either. Amalgamating 2 or 3 towns into one small town is not really changing the local capacity. If anything, the 3 town clerks that were once in place would be reduced to 2 or 1, creating fewer staff while altering really paltry savings. There is a bigger tax base, but there's also 3 times the infrastructure burden. It makes no sense, and there are few studies of amalgamation in that format which show that it does make sense. The sector is also failing to attract candidates to run for local government, which has resulted in an increased number of vacancies on council. And in the last general election, 125 municipalities held elections, while the other 151 were either acclaimed, deferred, or did not have enough candidates to hold an election. Other trends that we're seeing coming out of the most recent census data is that too many of our councillors are old and too few are young. Only 7% are under 35 years of age, while almost half of our councillors are over age 55. We've already mentioned the turnover in staff, but it's important to point out there is likely little succession planning with respect to staff turnover. So what we're finding is that new clerks come in, they're coming in with no education or background in the sector. Regional government will not add red tape and bureaucracy. Remember, 74% of our municipalities have fewer than 1 employee. This province is hardly sinking under the weight of massive municipal bureaucracy. Instead, we are suffering from a municipal system that does not allow councillors to provide the kinds of effective government services that people have come to expect in this day and age. We suffer from too little bureaucracy. It isn't another layer of government. Remember, we're the only province, except for PEI, whose population is even smaller than ours at 146,000, that doesn't have some form of regional administration. So far, it hasn't spelled doom for any of those other governments that have regional governance. In fact, it's the norm around the world, and it's the way the world does municipal government. There is an acknowledged issue with capacity within the municipal sector of Newfoundland and Labrador. Rather than working to improve capacity, the most recent amendments to Municipalities Act and other legislative amendments have focused on increasing oversight of or limitations to municipal authority. Some examples of that: the Municipalities Act, when it was recently amended, now forces councils to use a public auction or tender for sale of assets over $500. So before, if you had used fire equipment, for example, that you wanted to donate to another community, you could do that. Now you can't do that under the current act. You have to put it up on tender and let it go out. And it just creates another whole level of bureaucracy. Recent fiscal framework transfers came with new accountability measures that force councils to prove that they're making the best efforts to collect all own source revenues. Requests for approval to use electronic voting have been met with concerns that councils could not implement an electronic system that would make voting too easy. One former minister said, "Oh my God, we'd have a lot of people voting that don't currently vote today. We really wouldn't want that." Imagine. Consultations on the new municipal legislation have been ongoing, and MNL is advocating for new municipal legislation that provides more autonomy. Our act right now, the Municipalities Act, is the most antiquated act in the country. Property tax makes up approximately 78% of all own source revenue for our sector. Municipalities need permanent or own source revenue opportunities, those not depending on a transfer from the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. MNL has conducted an investigation on dedicated municipal income tax and sales tax. We need to find efficiencies within the current municipal taxation and expenditure systems to improve infrastructure funding and design a management system. And we can improve the property tax system itself initially through a review of the assessment process, which is ongoing. So some considerations. We know we have a democratic deficit. We have a democratic deficit, and we have a financial deficit. But I always look at if you have a problem, then there's an opportunity for improvement. I guess that's my healthcare background. And right now, when I look around this room and I look at my colleagues that are sitting at the table, obviously everybody cares enough to be here tonight. We all want what's best for this province. We need to get away from our patriarchal partisan system that we currently have in this province and really start to work together in a true way to ensure that we have a fabulous province for the future of our children and our grandchildren. That's what drives me to be involved. It's not because of the pay, I can tell you. That's not why I'm here. And if we don't find a way of making that happen, truly, we are not going to be able to achieve the things that I know that our province can do by working together. We can look at committee structures that would help us to ensure that in future bills like Muskrat Falls would actually have more oversight, would have more participation up front, so we're not left with the boondoggle that we have in that project today. And, you know, and that's the kind of things that we need to do. We need to ensure that that can never happen again in our future. And the only way of doing that is bringing more people to the table. So in closing, I just want to say thanks. It's a great opportunity. I look forward to the debate, and I look forward to the questions later.
Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Mary Shortall, who's the president of the Federation of Labor.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank Dr. Locke and CARE for the invitation to come and provide our thoughts on public policy and key economic and social challenges facing this province and its citizens in the foreseeable future. Given the significance of these issues, I've been looking forward to our discussion and debate here this evening. But I don't see that the Newfoundland Federation of Labor or the organizations that are represented by my fellow panelists as special interests necessarily. What is currently happening in our province and the impacts of government's policy decisions on our economy, our communities, and our families is in everybody's interests. And while we may have differing views, and we may not always reach agreement on many issues, I know there are some areas where we share common ground, not only with each other, but with all the citizens of this province, because we all live and work here in this province. We all want Newfoundland and Labrador to prosper and grow and be the place where we and others want to live, work, and raise a family. An economy where no one gets left behind, where we can all participate with the opportunity for good jobs, the great social programs that we need, fair taxes, an environment where business can grow, and where the next generation is secure, knowing we are all working to leave them in a province that is an even better place to live, and certainly no worse off than we have today. This conversation tonight is very important, not only to the 65,000 members that I represent, but to all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. Our members, like all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, work and live in every single community in our vast province. They spend their money and support, or maybe even own, local businesses. They are part of the municipalities that Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador represents, or they may even be on council, or the mayor of their community or town where they live. They are consumers of public services, whether or not they work in the public sector, and their children, who are tomorrow's workforce, are as well. We all share these goals, needs, and experiences, all citizens of our wonderful province, and I agree, we all care deeply about this province and our future. This is why our discussion is so important. In my opinion, what has been missing from all the government consultations and meetings and discussions is about what is underlying the real crisis in our economy. True, we have entered an era of fiscal and economic challenge driven by the predictable crash in global oil prices. True, we are facing unprecedented demographic changes, as we heard, and we've all heard the stats and evidence to back these challenges up. We have also heard many different solutions and approaches to try and fix the problems. What we do not have And what we desperately need to help us navigate through these troubled waters right now is a strong and creative vision to drive the economy forward and support the best quality of life possible for our citizens. Without this vision, we are running the risk of making short-sighted decisions that may do greater harm, with many unintended consequences for our economy and the citizens of the province now and in the longer term. We need solutions to address the challenges we face today, but we also need to think about the final destination. To support Jerry's points, we don't want to emerge from these challenges into a worse long-term situation. We can't ensure the choices we make today are not at the expense of making life worse down the road if we don't have a plan and a vision to guide us. We heard this past week that the Premier will be releasing a vision document in the coming weeks. So how exactly have they been guided in the significant policy decisions we have seen them make over the past year if they don't have a vision? Their actions suggest a vision of a balanced budget, but we know that a real vision shared by all the people of this province is far broader and more forward-thinking than that. And that's where our focus has been. We have been working towards a longer-term vision which balances the books by steadying the economy through the downturn in the economy with stimulus and deficit actions and supporting population, employment, and diversification to broaden the tax base in the long term. We don't want to settle for high unemployment rates and profiteering at the expense of workers and citizens, inequality, poverty, or environmental degradation. We believe, and many people have told us, that we can aim for a better long-term future, one that serves the interests and needs of all its citizens. But we need a vision of what that means. How do we design budgets and policies that places the priority on the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, one that builds jobs and an economy for the future, and a place where people are healthy and thriving while making government's financial position more secure? These things are not mutually exclusive. They are too often treated as separate entities, but for us, they are not. Our vision is one of an economy richer in good jobs, fairer and environmentally and economically sustainable. And I think we can all agree we have to have better outcomes in many areas, but we also have to recognize and take pride in the strides that we have made already, and we can't afford to fall backwards. For example, we already know demands in many areas like health are growing, yet we have also heard strong calls for cutbacks in the public sector. When it comes to core issues like health care, we have to stop thinking in terms of costs and expenses on government's books. And we need to start focusing on health care as an investment that will have big payoffs in the longer term if the results are a healthier population. It would be naive of us to think that we are going to get something or somewhere better without an investment. And it doesn't have to be financial. It may only require an investment of our time to start thinking more broadly or to plan for the longer term. Because the only other option, one which we do not accept, is a strategy that takes things away from people and services almost to the point of hitting rock bottom, so that anything on the path upward then looks better. But that's not a vision. That's action that will result in a declining quality of life and economy that is even worse off. Jerry talked about how the public sector contributes greatly to our vision and the impact on the private sector when those jobs are lost and services eliminated. Cutting these jobs, by the way, won't raise the price of oil. It is possible to build a different kind of economy, one that doesn't focus on resource extraction, boom and bust industries only. It's possible to build a different type of economy that focuses more on locally owned businesses that create good jobs. Those are the jobs that sustain families and they sustain our communities. Local jobs that pay living wages and have opportunity for growth and offer stability and security. Jobs that attract people to our province and keep them there. Smaller-sized, locally owned businesses tend to spend more of their revenues locally, creating more jobs and economic stimulus per dollar compared to large-sized and externally owned businesses. Government needs to reorient the policy environment immediately by protecting existing jobs in the public and private sectors. They not only support current well-being and economic demand, they also help attract and retain young workers. They are the foundation for future growth. Building human capital and boosting productivity and innovation by investing in education, training, and labor market strategies. Adding new jobs through diversification, local procurement policies, value-added resource extraction, and green jobs, including jobs in energy efficiency, sustainable transportation, local and traditional food production. Investing in social capital and social infrastructure that boosts productivity, and investing in women's work, pay equity legislation, a job strategy for women, invest in jobs with living wages. A vision for a jobs economy in Newfoundland and Labrador also needs to focus on building a stable and growing working age population. According to a national study on the state of rural Canada, population decline and aging is the biggest obstacle to growth and development in rural Newfoundland and Labrador. Instead of seeing this as an obstacle, why not a risk? And rethink how we mitigate this risk to ensure a better quality of life for our citizens in the next 20 years, even if we have the same demographic. Obviously, we should be striving for growth, but not at the expense of ignoring the needs and aspirations of the population we have. The aging demographic in Newfoundland and Labrador will create an odd paradox of a shrinking labor force, out-migration, and labor shortages combined with high unemployment. So the government will need an aggressive action plan, in our opinion, to support our growing urban population, encourage youth to stay and work in our province, and support workers in transition to fill the many job openings resulting from people aging out of the workforce. Jerry also talked about the inequality that exists in our society, both wage and gender. Many economists, Conference Board of Canada, the IMF, and others agree that austerity budgets, especially in times of economic downturns, only serve to widen the gap. We currently have an economy that is highly skewed in terms of distribution of income. And one thing I believe we can all agree with is that income inequality is bad for the economy. We had a report done from the Canadian Centre of Policy Alternatives on the impact of the April 2016 budget, and it shows quite clearly that women were very much disproportionately impacted. So government has the opportunity to make real change if they adopt a gender-sensitive approach to the budget process, right from initial consultations to the policy and programs they put in place. If they actually focused on policies and programs to narrow the gap, this would improve both productivity and growth. Inequality is a drag on economic growth, and we cannot afford to exclude any citizens from participation in the economy, and it doesn't have to be this way. There is still more than enough money in our economy that nobody needs to be forced into poverty, and nobody needs to lack adequate health care, education, libraries, and other important services. Every child in Newfoundland and Labrador, even the poorest, should have a realistic chance of a good life. Government can take steps towards a fairer economy, starting immediately by addressing income equality and by safeguarding and improving programs and services, raising the minimum wage, for example, increase the income threshold for low-income individuals and families to be exempt from income taxes, adequately fund social assistance programs. When we talk about a jobs-rich, fair, and sustainable economy, our vision definitely needs to include significantly reduced and declining emissions of local pollutants and greenhouse gases, and significantly greater increasing number of good green jobs. Improving energy efficiency and increasing energy conservation are two significant ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and they also generate social and economic benefits, creating jobs and spurring economic growth, and by the way, will result in lower household energy bills. It also results in more comfortable homes and improvements to mental and physical health. It should be relatively easy for government to amend the fuel tax to be a carbon levy, applying to emissions across the whole economy without increasing the gasoline tax rate. It could raise between $200 and $300 million more per year. The carbon levy could be applied to a range of pollution sources based on their level of carbon emissions. The revenues could be used to support transfers to individuals as well as improvements in energy efficiency that help to save homeowners and businesses money. Our vision of a jobs-rich, fair, and sustainable economy includes a provincial budget that raises adequate revenues to support jobs and fairness and is balanced over an appropriate term, not every year. Government needs to counterbalance the swings of the business cycle, spending when the economy is weak and saving a portion of revenues when the economy is strong and tax revenues are higher. This means that over a period of successful business cycles, the budget will be balanced. We need to regain perspective on debt and recognize that the real crisis here is very high and rising unemployment. Government needs to set an appropriate level of ambition and realize the need to balance the long-term benefits of borrowing with the short-term cost. Government needs to strengthen sustainable revenue sources and increase local government control over revenues. We understand that the current debt is mainly the result of irresponsible cuts by the previous government when the economy was strong and oil revenues were high. The reality of tax cuts is that they make it harder to balance the budget. The budget fell into deficit when oil was more than $100 a barrel. It's worth noting as well that much of the current provincial debt is at high borrowing rates, up to 10%. In fact, the government could consider borrowing money now at really long terms and extremely low interest rates so it can pay down high interest debt in the future as it comes due. There should also be a review of that debt, including clear accounting for what the debt was borrowed for, the creditors, and the terms with a view to the potential for consolidation at lower rates. This means that indeed, Newfoundland and Labrador has a revenue problem. They have taken some steps to resolve it, government, but in a regressive way. Many mistakes were made, and in our opinion, many opportunities lost. Besides converting the gas tax to a carbon levy, modest increases to corporate income tax rates for big business, and modest increasing personal income tax rate for those with high incomes would help to share the load more fairly. There is also room for a mix of revenue increases in specific areas like a windfall profits tax and a junk food tax, and reductions in others like the HST on books, user fees that disproportionately affect lower income people, and more. That's a short snap of our vision and the result of discussions that we have been having with our members and the general public, and one we hope to continue to have about all those options which we believe will build a strong economy for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker this evening, before we get into the debate portion, is Vaughn Hammond, who's the director of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Vaughn?
Mr. Hutton said, my name is Vaughn Hammond. I'm Director of Provincial Affairs for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. We're a national organization, but I'm responsible for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. In this province, we represent over 2,000 small and medium-sized enterprise owners. They are in all regions of the province, represent all sectors, and all parts of the economy. What I want to talk about is actually just some things around the environment within which businesses are trying to operate now. We all know about the fiscal, as it's been identified. I like to call it a situation, but many call it a crisis. The fiscal situation of the province is such that we now have a deficit that is almost equal to the surplus that we had in 2009. I think one of the things that you have to focus on between 2009 and 10 is for all intents and purposes, that we essentially spent almost $2.5 billion in 1 year, or whether that was spent or whether there was revenue decreases and all that kind of stuff. But what you have to focus on is the fact that the difference between 1 year to the other, that's quite profound. There's a slide that I'll get into in a few minutes, but what we have to recognize as well is that if we don't deal with our deficit, that just adds to our debt, which compounds our problem, which increases, as Richard said earlier, the cost to service that debt. Speaking of debt, net debt per capita based upon the latest numbers, public accounts were released 2 weeks ago, I guess. Based upon those numbers, we now have about a $24,000 per capita debt. That is much larger than what we had even in 2006. So it's kind of like this thing of back to the future. You'll note, based upon a chart, that there was a significant decrease, but then over time, now we've gone back up again. That has to be addressed, because if we don't address it now, then we're going to have to address it into the future. And the way that we have to address it may be a lot harsher, as Richard said earlier, than what would be now. Expenditures. Between 2008 and 2010, on a real basis, spending went up 30%. That, if you tie back to the whole idea that we almost spent $2.5 billion between 2009 and 2010, is probably part of the reason why. The other thing that you should take away from this chart as well is that as soon as spending goes up, it's really, really difficult to get that spending back down. Regardless of whatever government tried to do, the previous administration and the previous administration before that and the previous administration before that, from 2010 on, they didn't achieve what it was that they needed to achieve in order to reduce spending. It's easy to spend money, but it's clearly a lot harder to rein that back in when the times are necessary. This next chart is actually quite telling as well. It's based upon the public accounts, but if you look at it on a real basis, revenues are actually are 10% lower now than what they were in 2006. That's on an inflation-adjusted basis. We're now taking in less money now than what we did in 2006, but we have spending at 2016 levels. That's clearly not a sustainable approach, and it's one that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. I want to give you an idea in terms of, I represent small business, small and medium-sized enterprise owners. I want to give you an idea of what small business means to Newfoundland and Labrador. In 2015, and these are numbers that are available on the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador's website, Newfoundland and Labrador Stats Agency actually. In 2015, 99.5% of Newfoundland and Labrador businesses were small and medium-sized enterprises. That means those are businesses less than 500 employees. If you actually look at the businesses that are less than 20 employees, it's 87%. These are our main job creators. The reason why we need smaller businesses to get bigger, so go from small to medium and medium to large, is precisely because they create jobs. In 2015, these are StatsCan data, but in 2015, small and medium-sized enterprises, again, less than 500 employees represented, they created 40% of the jobs within Newfoundland and Labrador. Public sector created 26%, and large businesses created 27%. The next slide that I'm going to show you, I want you to be able to relate this back to the slide previous, because this slide shows the number of Newfoundland and Labrador businesses. These are all businesses within Newfoundland and Labrador. Again, this is on the Newfoundland and Labrador Statistics Agency website. In 2014 and 2015 combined, cumulative, there were 1,400 less businesses in Newfoundland and Labrador than there were in 2013. If we rely upon, and if you look at the data further, which I didn't include here, but if you look at the data further, the majority of those losses were felt by those businesses that had less than 20 employees. If small and medium-sized enterprises are to create 47% of the jobs in this province, then we certainly need to reverse that. The question is now, how do we go about it? Gross domestic product, or the value of what we produce in this province, it's been going up, it went up and down. In 2009, if you look at the graph, it was 20.5% reduction. That's actually not necessarily how much we produce, but the value of what we produced. It was oil. As soon as oil went down to $50 a barrel, then our GDP went down. The same thing was happening in 2014 and 2015. No, 2014 and 2015, sorry. The largest portion of that 10.9% that you saw in 2015 was the price of oil. That's not to say that there wasn't anything produced. That's not to say that there wasn't pullback in the economy, because there was, and our members felt it. Our members had to make decisions that they had to make in terms of streamlining, finding ways to keep their businesses going. But that 10.9% is actually a value. It's the value of oil. However, what we've done now, instead of, I think there's an economist on the mainland, his name is Stephen Gordon. He identified the recession that Newfoundland and Labrador experienced, as well as Alberta and some respects Saskatchewan. I think he identified it as a productivity-based recession. And it's largely because the value, I think, and there's an economist in the room, and he can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's largely based upon the fact that the value of what we produce is actually what caused the recession. The challenge we have now, and I think the concern we should have, is that the approaches that government has taken recently, most recently in its spring 2016 budget, is to actually make that a demand-based recession. That's to take money out of people's pockets. It's to make businesses rethink investments. It's to make different behaviors occur that's not going to improve the economy. That's what we should be concerned about, and that's what public policy, quite frankly, should be concerned about. I think, going back to the slide, that one, I think one of the things that we should be concerned about as well, anecdotally what we're hearing from some of the people on the ground, is that there are a number of businesses closing. 2016 has been a really difficult year, particularly depending upon the municipality within which a business is situated. With the fees and taxes and the quickness of it, I think it's not so much the fact that taxes increased, but it's the quickness and the magnitude of it. I think if there was a period of time like 5 years where the government said, we're going to increase your taxes by $900 million and you're going to have 5 years to prepare for it, I think that would have been a lot easier to handle than $900 million in 3 months, because that's essentially what happened. And I mean, in October last month, we still had fees increasing, and we'll probably have fees increasing in January as well. So, I mean, in Western Newfoundland, or sorry, in Central Newfoundland in particular, they're already going to see fee increases on their waste. To Mayor Olford's point about regionalization, if it's to occur, should have a cost savings attached to it. But if it's the model that we're seeing in Central Newfoundland now for waste management, whereby costs are going up, for all intents and purposes, exponentially, that's a model that needs to be rethought. And for those residents or businesses in Western Newfoundland that are now going to have their waste go from there to Central Newfoundland, they're going to have to deal with $136 per ton for their waste. For many business owners that do not now have to pay for waste, particularly in Western Newfoundland, that's going to be a shock, I think. It depends upon their waste makeup, don't get me wrong. I mean, if they're more dependent upon cardboard, then it's going to be less money for them. But it's something that we have to think about, that if we are going to tax and if we are going to charge fees, that there has to be an approach that's managed, that people are aware that it's coming, the reasons why it's needed. Because it's okay to tax, but if nobody knows what the tax is for, and if nobody understands what the tax is for, then that makes it even that much more difficult to handle. I think when it comes to the public discourse on economic diversification, I think this slide in and of itself indicates that, yes, mining and oil and gas are a big part of the economy, or at least they were. I'm not necessarily convinced, though, that we don't have a diversified economy. I think we do. The challenge is that the economic activity that we have ongoing in this province is not enough to replace the quick value that came from oil and gas and mining. The challenge I think the reason why provincial government is so concerned about economic diversification is because of the impact that the decline in the price of oil had on royalties. For all intents and purposes, when oil prices started going down 2 years ago, we've effectively taken $2.5 billion away from the provincial treasury. I don't know if there's any activity, be it information technology, arts and culture, tourism, whatever, that's going to be able to replace that income for the government. It's a different structure. It's a different way of doing business. There's royalties involved in oil and gas extraction, as well as mining. There's no royalties involved in tourism, in tourists coming to the island. What that is a driver. It generates local income. It generates money that can be spent regionally or locally, which tends to be where that money is spent. But I think when we talk about economic diversification in this province, and we talk about it from the perspective of the small business, the small business owner already knows that they're diversified. In order for a small business to survive, they have to be diversified. Right now, there's so many things that small business owners are thinking about in order to make sure their business can survive. They are bringing in new business, new goods. They're thinking about new ways to serve their customer. They're thinking about maybe new ways to get to markets if it's easy to do. What we ultimately need to recognize is that the oil and gas industry didn't create a lot of jobs in this province. Create a lot of value, absolutely. For one person in the oil and gas sector, they probably produced the value of $600,000 for the economy. Yet you consider somebody who's in retail trade, they generate obviously that much less. But there's so many more people that are working in retail trade. There's so much that you can generate from retail trade, attaching people to the workforce, getting people trained, determining how they can actually develop work skills, work-life skills. These are the kinds of things that small business owners can do. They can help get people attached to the workforce for better jobs later. I don't think anybody in retail trade or the fast food industry or name an industry, I don't think any of them think that they're going to have lifetime employees. It'd be great if they do, because they'll likely train them, become managers, that kind of thing. But the fundamental thing about those in retail and those in fast food restaurants and those in hospitality, they know that they're training people for future prosperity. And that's the value that they bring. Unfortunately, with the way that we've approached the fiscal situation in this province, by increasing taxes and all these kinds of things, it's creating a challenge now for small business owners. What we hear constantly now is that small business owners are rethinking how to keep labor in their workforce without having to lay them off. So what's come up is they'll go to their employees and say, will you work for 4 days as opposed to 5? It's a 20% pay cut, but it's a job. Some other things that they're doing is work sharing. So they'll take two employees, one employee works a week, another works another week, and they keep transferring. But even though they're cutting their pay in half, they still have a job. And if it does pick up, then they know that they're going to have somebody that they can bring in, and that person also knows when things pick up, they have a job. We also have a problem within this province of people entering the workforce, entering and entering of the workforce. We have a lot. I was going to have a slide for this too, but I'll throw it out anyway. In the boom times, we still had double-digit unemployment. I think it got as low as 10.5% at one point in 2012 or 13. We were full employment, I think, what an economist would consider in 2012 or 13 or 2011. If full employment is 10.5% unemployment, then we have a lot of people within this province that are not attaching themselves to the workforce, and that's an issue in and of itself. Because there was opportunity, and yet people still didn't avail of it. Small business owners were there to hire. They were there to pick up people, make them work, but they found it so difficult to find those people. Now it's easier, don't get me wrong. People coming back from Alberta, people that were earning 6 figures, they're coming back now, they need the money. There is a reason why bankruptcies are going up. It's not because of small business owners, it's because people have extended themselves. Because they were working in Alberta, or they were working in an industry where they earned a lot and they spent it. They're not much different from what the provincial government did, to be quite frank. They saw it lasting forever. That's why I think many people look at small business owners and say, why aren't you hiring that person for $150K a year? If they hire somebody for $150K a year, they don't have a business. I'm sorry. They can still provide a living. Understand this. They can still provide a living for them. They just can't provide the living to somebody that was working in an oil patch. And on top of that, what they want to do is be able to train them to what they need. So they need people to last. So if somebody's looking for work in this province right now, you need to assure the employer that when you go into the interview, that you're going to stick it out for the long haul. And not when the price of oil goes back up, that you're going back to Alberta or up north or whatever again. The challenges for small business right now in this province are real. I think public policy has a role. I'm looking forward to what what your questions are, what the topics are going to be. But I think we have to make have an understanding that if we are to grow in this province, we're going to rely upon small business, and the policies that help them are what we should choose. Thank you.
I felt a little like Donald Trump there, hovering around you in the background from that last debate. That was my subtle hint that we need to move. We're actually running a little bit behind, so for the folks who have stuck it out, thank you very much. This is the portion of the evening where if there's something that you folks would like to discuss that you heard somebody else on the panel say that you wanted to touch on or respond to, is there anybody who heard something from one of the other panelists this evening who'd like to say something? Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll wait for somebody else.
I kind of knew that was no go. Go for it. I've interviewed these people many times.
Yeah. So like I said in my opening comments, right? I understand that the challenges that the people of the province, I understand the challenges that our public sector is facing with this fiscal challenge. I mean, my wife is a public sector worker, right? My sister is a public sector worker. Everybody in this province is touched by public sector workers, right? But the math of where we are is really undeniable. We need to do something. So we've done things on the expense side. We've done things on the debt side in spades. We've done more than our share on the debt side, I would argue. So the area that we haven't looked at is the expenses. So all we're saying is, look, if you're going to increase taxes $900 million and ask taxpayers to come up with that additional revenue in their own budgets, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask government to look in their budgets to find some savings. I don't think that's unreasonable, right? So often the comment that you hear, you can hear it on open line shows, you hear it on Twitter or whatever is, well, let's get businesses to pay more taxes. Let's increase corporate taxes or get the wealthy to pay for it, right? It sounds like a great idea. Sounds like it's a very simple solution to our predicament right now. It sounds a little bit too good to be true, and the reality is it is too good to be true. So let me just touch on the corporate tax side of things. So we did see an increase in corporate taxes this year, in this last budget. So last year, corporate taxes, the province brought in $373 million, so a little bit over $373 million. Then they increased corporate taxes. This year, the projection for what the government is going to collect in corporate taxes is, I should have brought my glasses, $237 million. So there's a loss in corporate tax revenue this year alone by $135 million. It's not there. Corporate profits are at a 15-year low in this province, right? That pot of money out there that's existing that somebody's hoarding, it doesn't exist. This debt that we have, it's our debt. It's our debt. It's spending that we've all enjoyed, and it's up to our government to action the last three of those levers.
Anybody else? Mary?
Comment on that. Just want to make a couple of points. If the corporate income tax rate was raised from 15% to 16%, a very modest raise, it would be the same as our neighbors in the Atlantic region. That wouldn't make you, as the argument goes, less competitive, because it would only be the same as our neighbors in Nova Scotia and PEI, and it would generate around an additional $50 million a year. The taxes that have been collected in the last budget from the government, raised a certain amount of money, and it's good that they had the discussion about how we raise revenue, because Newfoundland and Labrador does have a revenue problem, but they were regressive taxes. So they weren't based on people's ability to pay. They were across-the-board taxes and levies and fees that disproportionately hurt people who earn a lower income. So raising the personal income tax to kind of average of what it would be in the Atlantic provinces, or where it was back in 2007, would also generate a fair amount of money, because right now, since 2007, we've lost about $600 million annually in the personal income tax rate. In PEI, for example, the highest level cuts in at around $70,000. In Newfoundland and Labrador, it cuts in at $175,000. So there's a lot of extra revenue that could be generated there. The one question I do, or the one challenge I guess I ask about the percentage, you know, the per capita of how much spending government does per person, that's kind of skewed as well, because when you look at the inequality in wages in our economy, and when you base it on what each individual person is spent on each individual person, that's skewed. When you look at the percentage of our whole economy, the percentage of GDP, that's a better indication of where government spending is. And when you look at our demographic and everything else that we talked about tonight, we're about middle of the pack. We don't spend like drunken sailors. We spend around middle of the pack to satisfy the reality of our province. And so it's just a clarification on some of that argument. The other thing about corporate income tax is that that money is taxed only on the profits that a corporation makes. And with multinational corporations in this province, 55%, a greater percentage of our economy than in any other province in Canada, actually leaves this province. And so to raise the income tax, corporate income tax by 1%, would put some of that money back into the economy where it should be.
Yes, but government raised corporate income tax by 1% and they lost money. The money is not there, right? We're at a 15-year low of corporate taxes. That's the reality. And you can say that, okay, well, let's be competitive on corporate income tax, but you can't pick, just like I was talking about with your personal tax burden is now the highest in Canada, you can't cherry pick one specific issue or one specific cost and say that we're competitive so there's room to move on there. You have to look at the complete package, right? So when you look at we want businesses to grow, we want businesses to advance, we want them to hire people, we want them to expand and grow our economy. That's how we support a public sector, right? So right now in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have our corporate tax rate, you call it competitive, I think businesses would say something different. But, okay, let's say for it's middle of the road at best, right? Also, piled on top of that, you have some of the highest transportation costs to move goods and services in and out of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we produce a product here, it costs us more to get it out. We have the second highest utility costs for business of any province in Canada. All these costs add up to make us competitive. So if there's an opportunity for us to create an environment that is going to encourage business to grow and expand, those are the types of things we can do. I'm not saying there should be no corporate income tax. I'm not saying there should be no taxes. But it's all about balance. And right now, I would suggest that government has to action that third lever to find some balance right now.
I want to comment further. It seems like always when we talk about government and trying to reduce costs, the first people that appear to pay a price, and I keep saying this is not about, even though I represent a large number of public sector employees, we have other public sector employees that are such as teachers. When you remove people, I keep saying you remove services. You have to ask what services, and I've traveled this province extensively in the last 6 months, and I can tell you, not because I represent a significant component, I am not sure that I can name a certain or a particular public service employee that you could remove without seriously impacting on public service. Just look at what's happened recently here with bus inspections. We have all the positions not filled. There's a number of safety issues. You go into our long-term care facilities, sometimes you have to spend money to save money. We have staff that's working exorbitant hours, being burnt out. Like Richard said, my wife too works in healthcare, works in long-term care. It's not uncommon to get a phone call and say, I'm not going to get home at 8 o'clock. I'm just after working 3 12-hour shifts. I'm going to be home at midnight tonight. Or we hear from our correctional officers that's just after punching in 12-hour shifts in a facility down there that look, I wouldn't put anybody into that work 24-hour shifts. So I'd ask anybody, tell me where you can remove people where it impacted on the services, because what's not often talked about, we have Newfoundland and Labrador where I think the community, if you look at the total number of communities that's incorporated or unincorporated, is in excess of 600, spread out over Newfoundland and Labrador. We're made up of a mainland and an island surrounded by islands. The age demographics, there's a number of factors. It's not as simple as saying that the public service is too big. There is not a province in Canada that you can compare Newfoundland and Labrador to when it comes to the delivery of services.
Well, and that's the age-old problem, isn't it? That every government has faced since 1949 and before. And we know what happened in the 50s when people tried to relocate. But even now, so I guess the question is how do you tackle it? I've covered governments for 30 years who everybody says we're going to diversify the economy. Well, how do you do it? Somewhere up in the tip of the Northern Peninsula that isn't right on the coast and has a fishery that's vibrant at that point in time, you still have to deliver all these services. So what's the answer?
But it is about expectations.
Are people expecting too much?
Well, I mean,
Is that what you mean?
yeah, even from citizens to business owners, I mean, even business owners go and they look for government to give them things. I mean, one of the things that we argue against is subsidies for businesses. Because how can a government pick a winner or a loser, right? I mean, we seek to diversify the economy, but at the same time, it's government choosing which sectors can grow and which ones can't. I mean, I think you should let it just happen, and people are going to make it happen. If they want to make it happen, they will make it happen. And if there's an opportunity, and if there's value to be created out of some innovative idea, I think Ms. Shortle has a I don't want to bring it up, but it's a razor pencil on the back of her poppy in order to keep it in place. So it's a different way of doing it, but it's an innovative way of looking at stuff. And if that's something, one of the things we don't do well in this province either is commercialize ideas. I mean, if you can commercialize that pencil eraser as a thing to keep a poppy in place, first of all, it saves the Legion money because they're not losing poppies all over the place.
It actually
So
takes money away from the Legion.
I was going to say, they may not like this idea too much.
No, but you take the point, though, that there are different things that can happen that are going on within rural Newfoundland and Labrador that we're not really celebrating or we're talking about. And we're not really allowing them the opportunity to make it happen and make it work. I mean, we're still focused on this whole idea that we need to replace the income that we've lost from oil and gas. And we don't necessarily have to do that. It's through hard work, it's through innovation, it's through ingenuity, and it's just through application that we're going to get through this. And it's not oil and gas. We have to forget about oil and gas, really, honestly. Let it go.
I think as well, when you look at it, there's a lot of the public that really are uninformed. As much as we have media 24 hours a day now, it's on your phone, it's on your iPad, it's everywhere you look. People really still don't understand how government works. What do your taxes pay for? What do your municipal taxes pay for? What do your provincial taxes pay for? What do your federal taxes pay for? They really don't have that concept. And so that creates that disconnect between what their expectations are and what we're able to provide based on the tax dollars that, again, they don't want to be paying. Nobody wants to ever charge more taxes. Any level of government that increases taxes understands how hard that is to do. And so you look at how can you meet the expectation of your public that, say, may want to have all the sidewalks clear in an area like in Labrador West where we have snow 8 months of the year, and look at what the cost of that would be, which would be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. And are they willing to pay for that? No, they're really not willing to. So in some ways, it's a function of our patriarchal system that we've had in Newfoundland and Labrador. We elect people and expect them to have all the answers. Well, I'm sorry. No one government has all the answers. The only way we're ever going to get past where we're to in our province is coming together and working together, truly educating everybody so that they understand what it means to live here and what are their expectations. Do everybody expect to be making a 5-figure salary? Because that's unrealistic. Right? That's unrealistic. But a living wage, a wage that can support your family and that you can stay in your community and be productive, then that's more doable. And that's where small businesses and services walk in, and social enterprise and all kinds of great innovative ways. But we also need to use technology more. I live in Labrador West. I've been a nurse for 30 years. When I first graduated and I moved there to work, in order for me to have a doctor look at a set of x-rays, I had to send it in the mail. I had to wait probably 7 days. He got it, he looked at it, he gave me a call back, right? Now that's on the internet. They have a PEC system where the doctors can look at that. That diagnosis now is pretty instantaneous, right, for it to happen. So we're able to do it in some places, but then I'm still sending patients that are spending $2,000 and $3,000 to come to St. John's to see a specialist for a 5-minute visit that they probably could have sat home and used Skype, right? Not even video conferencing in a hospital, but Skype, right? And we haven't created that innovation in the system in a lot of our public systems because it comes down to payment methods and money. I'll say it comes down to money in a lot of cases, is why we haven't made that innovation change happen, and we need to make it happen.
Ms.
And
Shortall?
so-
Sorry, you wanted to say something there?
I just want to say, I agree with what Karen is saying. I mean, and just on taxes, they did an interview right across, or a poll right across the country, because most provinces understand that, you know, they had to adjust their income tax rates and stuff. And people understand fundamentally by the response to this poll that taxes are the price that you pay for democracy, that in order to have the services that you need, you need to pay taxes based on fairness and people's ability to pay. But on the other point, I think it's really important that we talk about how we do sustain our communities and how we look at stuff like what Karen is talking about and small business and how we do that. But those communities need the public sector as well to feed off each other, especially when the economy is in the downturn. Those wages of the public sector workers and those services that the citizens of those communities need are really important to sustain those communities. If those people don't have money to go in and spend in the businesses, then the businesses aren't going to survive. If government doesn't support local businesses and innovations and the things, technology, you know, the technology doesn't have to be in St. John's, it can be in one of the rural communities. Then that's part of what we need to look at. You're right, we can't depend on oil and gas to fuel our economy for anymore. We have to look at other ways. But we have to understand what our demographic is and what our people are as well. So do you cut and slash people to go to the very bottom and then they crawl their way up? And that's a success story. The vision that we need to talk about, the budget is a tool to get to the vision. It's not the vision. The budget is just the way, it's not the outcome. So we have to look at those outcomes. Are there inefficiencies in our system? Probably, but talk to the people who work in them, look at them. But does that mean we have to cut funding from education or cut funding from healthcare to do that? Not necessarily, or cut jobs from those, not at all.
Mr. Hammond?
Just the point about what Mayor Olford said about governing. I mean, governing is about choices, and it is about people recognizing that if I want this, what am I prepared to do without if it means getting what I want? So if it is snow clearing, you can have snow clearing and you can't have every other thing that a municipality wants you to do. Then you have to make a choice, and that's not something that we do in this province very well. We want to be, government wants to be all things to everybody. Well, in actual fact, you can't be all things to everybody. You need to be able to, you need to provide the core services that make life possible. And that's what governments need to do. They need to get away from the idea that whatever makes a good press release. I don't mean to be harsh, but get away from the idea that we need a press release and get down to actually providing the services that people want. Some of the things the small business owners, I mean, some of the things that our members have told me just in conversations that if they don't see their elected officials from election day to election day and they're there doing the work that they need to do, they'll be quite content. And that's one of the things that I think we need to recognize as well, is that we need people doing the work. We need people identifying what our priorities are. Yes, there's stakeholder groups like ours that are going to talk to them, and they're going to say, this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to do, and they're going to have to try to figure out what that balance is. But in the end, though, government is about making hard choices. And right now, government has a lot of hard choices to make.
Very quickly, we're going to bring the audience in, then I'll give you
Okay,
30
sure.
seconds.
I'm not sure government is about making hard choices, actually. I think government is about giving people what they're asking for, I think, and that's part of the reason that we're in the situation we're in. We can't afford everything that we're doing now. That's plain and simple, right? So, you know, the saying, never waste a good crisis is, I think, is very pertinent here. I think in order to force change, force the innovation that we're talking about here, and I think we would all agree we'd like to see more innovation, particularly in areas like healthcare, everything, right? We need to look for these ideas and look for that. And this fiscal crisis that we have could be that, I think it is, I think it could be that catalyst to force everybody in this province and force our governments to look for new, innovative ways to do things. So I'll get a little bit controversial here now so we can stir it up. So one of the ways that they can do things differently is for government to not try to do everything itself and to actually look around for partners to help lighten the load, as every other province in this country has done. And I'm talking about partnerships, obviously, with the private sector or the not-for-profit sector to be able to improve outcomes for citizens while at the same time saving some money for taxpayers. Right? And I'll give you one example. So right now, if you want to, if you need to get a passport photo done, you can go down to your local drugstore. Somebody at the drugstore will take it for you, and you can send it off and get your passport in the mail. Does anybody in this room want to go back to the days where you had to stand in a lineup in a government building to get a passport photo taken? That's what we're talking about. That's an innovative way to deliver a government service that proves outcomes for citizens and at the same time can reduce costs of taxpayers.
Okay, Mr. Earl, I'll get quickly and then we'll get to the audience.
But pass the cost on to the consumer, because to use that example, Richard, when you stood in that one line to get your passport done was one fee. Now you go and pay an additional fee to get a picture and still have to go through a process. And again, on privatization, it's nothing that we've commissioned, but everywhere across this country, and reports are coming even at the states that nowhere can do. One recent one, very recent, I'll grab here. In Nova Scotia, somewhat, you talk about public-private partnerships. They had a bunch of schools that were built through a public-private partnership agreement. Guess what that government is trying to do today? After leasing these schools for 25 years, now they are trying to negotiate with that provider to buy those schools back because it's cheaper at a cost of $89.5 million. They try to buy and this is just a proportion of schools, to buy them back because it's cheaper than leasing them after leasing them for 25 years. That's public-private partnership.
Very brief.
Okay, so let's put aside the fact that our government has no money to be building infrastructure in the province. Right? Put that fact aside. Public-private partnerships have been studied extensively. We actually commissioned a study with two Mon professors that looked at it. It's been studied so much that because it's been studied so much, you can find an example or a situation where a public-private partnership didn't work. Absolutely, I concur with that, right? But the preponderance of evidence shows that the vast majority of them improve outcomes to citizens, lowers costs to taxpayers. There is a reason that every province in Canada, with the exception of Newfoundland and Labrador, is doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of partnerships with the private sector. And I guarantee you it's not because they cost more.
Okay, let's bring the audience in. First of all, Dr. Locke, do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to, we're going to get a mic here, guys? First off, let me thank you for an excellent presentation. I learned a lot here. But independent of what I learned, and I appreciate the discussion, but the Premier is going to be doing a vision statement in the near future at some point. I'm not sure when, but at some point. And one could argue that the vision statement would be the epitome of the provincial government's perspective on public policy. I think we can sort of agree with that kind of statement. And if we accept that, what one piece of advice would you give to the Premier, or what would you like to see? One most important thing you'd like to see in that epitome, in that vision statement. So that's for everybody. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll start,
Mayor
I
Alford, do you want
guess.
to start? Yeah, sure.
Sure. I mean, we've been talking about regional government as a way forward in this province long before I've been president of Municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador. We feel if we build regional ability, I guess, and structures, that will actually create a stronger province that can be more innovative at the regional level and respond to the challenges. So that's one thing I'd really like to see happen. I guess I'm going to go back to my dad, and he was a minor hockey person. He was in charge of Torbay minor hockey back in the day, and he said, we're really good at building kingdoms in Newfoundland and Labrador. We're not so really good at coming together and sharing those kingdoms. And we really need to come together like no time in our past if we're going to create the kind of communities and province that we want. So to me, regional governments would have to be there.
Mary?
I would think we just need to leave the deficit and the debt alone for a little while and concentrate on a jobs strategy, because the unemployment rate is going to go up to 19.8%. By government's own figures in the next 4 years now, and then, they said 5 years from the date of the budget. If we don't have a job strategy, which includes, population growth strategy, which includes looking at labor market and transitioning, all these people from Fort McMurray who are going to come home looking for jobs. If we don't have a jobs for all strategy, the deficit will always continue to be, a focus, and we'll never move forward, because we really need, in order to grow our economy, we're going to have jobs, and we're going to have to talk about what that looks like.
Mr. Hammond?
If I look at a vision document, one of the things that I would like to see is actually a focus on red tape for business. That's not to say that we should take all regulations, throw them out the window. It's actually to make it easier for a small business to start up. Makes it easier for a small business to expand. Because right now, there's a cost involved in trying to meet your requirements with government, regardless whatever government it is, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal. But at the provincial level, certainly a focus on trying to streamline how applications are made, how they're approved, that kind of thing. Customer service within government. If you call a toll-free number, or if you send an email to a general email inbox, then you should expect a response back. Or if you put in an application and you need it back in a certain period of time, and they say that it's going to be back in that period of time, then they should meet that deadline. So those are the kinds of things that small business owners encounter. So certainly red tape reduction would be one of the things that we'd like to see.
Jerry? Earl? Mr. Earl?
Basically, and again, not use frontline services as basically a scapegoat, whether that be healthcare or in education. Like, I think it's absolutely critical. I hate to see anybody, whether it be a business person, a manager, whatever, lose their position. One thing I've heard this government comment on, and whether they'll follow through, is a fatter, leaner management system. That's something, quite honestly, has never been looked at. It's always been the frontline people that are delivering the services. During the good times, they're the last to gain reward. During the bad times, they're the first to get punished.
Yeah, so fire in the kitchen. There's lots of options that government can use. It's not just about laying off people. There's a host of different things, from attrition to benefit levels of public servants. There's efficiencies that can be gained. There's consolidation, regionalization, all these things. You need to look at all these things. But their projection, their target is they have to reduce spending by about $250 million this year. That's the government's own target. If they don't do that, the year after that, if they try to do it, they're going to have to reduce spending by even more. By waiting is not in our favor. You reduce now, you will have less of an impact than if you reduce later.
Anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to put to one of the panelists, or a comment? Anybody at all? This gentleman right here. If you could just get the mic, wait for the microphone, sir.
I don't think I like the idea of layoffs. I don't think anybody really does. But what about wage cuts? Could we not do that in the public service and still maintain efficient frontline service, and perhaps focus those wage cuts on the people that are earning the most money that can afford it?
Mr. Earl?
When it comes to wage cuts, and I keep saying public sector employees, most in this province, all in this province, are like the rest of the general public. They have already seen less take-home pay. They have already, in many instances, seen increases in their taxation. They pay just like everybody else when they go for gas. They're actually commuting back and forth to work. So they are already contributing with less take-home pay. There's a levy that's been imposed on a good many of the public service. So I don't see that as certainly something that any person there. Why, again, would public sector employees, when businesses are not going to see any cut or any increase in their taxation, but frontline employees, again, many of them that are barely surviving. Like I said, I just spent an extensive period in this province. Well, people might talk about people having a lot. I can tell you the vast majority of frontline employees are surviving now today, paycheck to paycheck. To suggest that they would have less on that check, it's not something I could see that any of them could even fathom.
Von Hammond?
I think one of the things related to your question is kind of the slide that I put up about businesses, and well, the two slides, the one about businesses going down, and as well as their ability to create jobs. I think one of the things that's lost when you lose a business, you're actually losing. There are a number of families affected by that. That's not what gets reported. What gets reported is oh, we lost this business downtown, or we lost this business in wherever. What's not reported is the number of families that are affected by that. And what's not reported is the fact that those people have had their lives turned upside down as well. So the more businesses we lose, which we have this year, those are families affected. Even the budget, when they introduced the budget in April, there were numbers that came out that said in the private sector there would be 3,000 to 3,500 people unemployed this year. Those are 3,500 families. So the fact that we tend to focus on the public sector and we tend to focus on the idea that we need to protect those jobs, and as we do, there is an approach that can be taken, but if we don't do something to help business owners, then those are families that are affected as well. Those are people that are going to need retraining. Those are people that are going to have to pay their bills. So let's not lose sight of that as well. That we can't lose any more businesses because families are put as well.
Ms. Shortle?
The public sector workers are making less money, then that's less money than they're spending in those businesses. And so it's got that trickle effect in the economy. And when the economy is down already, you want to put more money into the economy. And it's during those times of economic downturn that the public sector is actually the stabilizer in the economy. So those jobs and those wages actually help to stimulate the economy. They keep businesses open. Paying people less, that downward pressure on wages is just going to keep slowing down the economy.
I think one of the things that we should recognize as well is that over the past 10 years, and I think there was particular pressure on the provincial government in 2008, 2009 to spend the oil wealth. And there were a lot of people that were saying that we should spend, we need investments in here, we need investments there. There was nobody saying save. They were saying spend here because of this, spend here because of that. Well,
For the record, we were saying safe.
no, fair enough.
Yeah.
But there was a greater pressure to spend, and government responded to that pressure because the message was that we need to spend in order to improve infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. That was during a boom time. Now we're saying that we need to spend because we need to stimulate the economy, and it's kind of like one of those things where Keynes always said, and I think you referred to it in your remarks, that in good times, reduce your spending, save, because in the bad times you're going to need that money. We have what I think some people call one-way Keynesians in our province, and those are the people that, regardless of where we are in a boom or bust cycle, they're going to want money spent. So.
Absolutely. I think, some of what Mary is saying, I think, is accurate. I mean, she's talking about stimulating the economy. Well, right now, government is spending $1.6 billion more than they're taking in. They're putting money into the economy, right? It's not a revenue problem, Mary. I can't, really. Sorry, it took me off there. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah. So, just for the record, I don't want to see my wife get her wages cut, just for the record. But the reality is that something has to change. And when you look at wages in the public sector, they are 27% higher than what counterparts in the rest of Atlantic Canada earn, right? There is an opportunity there. It's a choice, it's a difficult choice, but it's a choice that government is going to have to make. Layoffs, wage rollbacks, and Jerry's in a position, he can't say here tonight that wage rollbacks are good. That's political suicide for him, right? But these are the kinds of tough choices that we elect our politicians to make, especially in these times of fiscal crisis. But we don't have the money now to stimulate the economy. And the IMF did not say to Greece, keep spending, guys. They said the exact opposite.
And how's that working for Greece?
The Greece economy is doing much better. Portugal is doing much better. Spain is doing much better. So is Ireland.
Anybody else have a comment or a question they'd like to put to the panel? Up in the back here.
Hey, how you doing? One of the interesting things, going back to what Wade Locke said earlier and talking about the fiscal update, because I think that's one of the reasons why we're all here tonight, is the reaction to the fiscal update. And some of the numbers that we saw there are very scary in terms of what's going to happen, what's forecast over the next 4 years. And it goes back to a little bit about what Mary said. We're looking at upwards of 18.5% to 20% unemployment rate. a 58% participation rate. So that, coupled with an aging population, means that we're going to have less people working, participating in the workforce. 1 in 5, and you could say 1 in 4 people won't be working, right? So that's obviously an issue there. So my question to each of the panelists would be, what would you recommend to the government to combat that forecast on the unemployment rate? And just very quickly, on the fact, on the wages for public sector workers. Over the past 4 years, it's 0, 0, 2, and 3, with a CPI and inflation rate of 2.5% to 3.5%, actually has meant that public sector workers are taking home less in the past 4 years already. So it's not like there's over the past 4 years or X amount of years, there's been increases every single year. So I just wanted to put that out there. But I guess going back to the original questions, what would you do to combat those two numbers, particularly on 20% of unemployment rate, which we haven't seen since the moratorium days?
Ms. Alford, we'll start with you.
Well, I look at the fact that a lot of people that are not into the workforce today are lacking skills that they're required to work in today's society. And so we really need to get a better handle on what are the forces that are stopping them from being there, and put supports in place, the education programs, to get them to be able to be productive members of society, no matter what their ability or disability. And I truly mean that there's a lot of workers in our society that with some additional help in the beginning would be very productive, and that's been proven, I guess, in the long term, especially with the disabled workers. I think the other thing that we need to look at then is how can we decrease costs as well around system use. So I'm in a municipality. I'm looking for recreation programming so I can keep a healthy population, which is going to decrease costs for the long term on the province. It's going to allow people to deal with their chronic illnesses, bring blood sugars and blood pressures down and all that. And I got a school that has beautiful gymnasium into it, but I can't access that gymnasium. I got to go out and look to raise infrastructure money so I can build a multiplex, because I can't utilize infrastructure as in my community right now that was paid for by taxation and people's dollars. So why is that? Why is that we're not talking across government departments and using every bit of infrastructure and knowledge that's out there? We have school systems, we have children going through, and we have great teachers there, but they're not health educators. We've taken nursing and that expertise out of the school system, and then we wonder why we have poorer outcomes today. Why do we have people that are sicker and more ill? It's because we're not giving them the education that they require, that they need. And if you train or you teach, you educate a young person, they're actually bringing that home to their family as a unit. So we need to get back and start using each other's skills and expertise in order to create the kind of province that we want. That's just some small ways of doing it, but certainly I see that the social enterprise and increasing people's skill sets are ways forward.
Ms. Schroedel?
I don't disagree at all with that. I think the biggest issue that we have is the unemployment rate. Jobs is going to be the big crisis. The other thing that the budget document said was that the labor market was going to reduce within 5 years to where it was in the year 2000. So we really are going to need to look very seriously at how we do that. With cuts to education, we're going to see young people leaving the province. With high unemployment, we're going to see young people leaving the province. So how do we keep them and attract newcomers, immigrants and newcomers to this province? Well, some of the policies that government have made already are not going to do that. People aren't going to stay here if there's no social infrastructure, if there's no affordable housing, if there's no sufficient training for them. All those workers coming back from Alberta who are now out of work probably need to be retrained in other types of work for the labor market as it will look like in the next 4 or 5 years and beyond. We need to look at green jobs and the transition into green jobs and how we deal with that. We need to really have a population growth strategy, the one that government has already started over the few years, continue that and have a really good look at how we match who comes into this province with the skills we need, but also how we educate the people who are here for the jobs that we need. There's a real correlation between education and poverty and health as well. So, things like childcare, things like housing, things like early learning education, things like tuition freezes and affordable, accessible education. Those are the investments, not the costs, but the investments that this government should be making to ensure that we have that labor market and that we balance our unemployment rates.
Okay, Mr. Alexander.
High taxation will have a long-term impact on the economy, and it will stifle job creation and economic growth. That's proven. Government needs to walk that fine line between that, which they've done, its long-term impact. So it's short-term, it's safer for government to take that direction. But in terms of government reducing expenditures and that impact on the economy, if government reduces expenditures to a large extent, it can have a short-term impact on jobs, and it will have a short-term impact on jobs and the economy, but the economy will bound back fairly quickly after an expenditure reduction. What government is targeting is $250 million. That's their target on a 36, 34, $35 billion economy. It's a rounding error. But if they don't take the action of 250 this coming budget, then they'll force to make a bigger cut, which will be more impactful on the economy and on jobs in this province. Waiting is not in their best interest.
Mr. Hammond?
It might surprise you to hear it, but I think people should rely upon small business to create jobs. There's two things that can be done. One is actually to allow for on-the-job training to be funded through the labor market development agreements. Right now, on-the-job training is not recognized at all in any of the government programs that are available, both provincial, federal. So that has to change. The other thing is that there has to be increased cooperation between post-secondary education institutions as well as small business owners. Because what I will tell you is that the connections that were made in the past 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 years were more reliant upon the large development projects as opposed to the small business owners or the small businesses. It was a lot easier for people to get jobs on large development projects than it was to get a job with a small business owner. Actually, I want to correct, it was easy to get a job with a small business owner, but then in the 3rd and 4th year of your apprenticeship, you always had a large development project standing outside the door when you got one block done saying, come here, come here, come here. That was a challenge that a small business owner had. I think small business owners want to be training people. I think they want to focus on the skills that are necessary in order to grow the economy. I don't necessarily think that, I think they want to train them and invest in them. Hopefully they'll stay, but they're not averse to the whole idea that that person's going to leave and create a business. Take their skills and create another business and create more jobs and that kind of thing. So I think you need to focus and work with small business owners, and there's some changes within the federal provincial funding structure for training that can help that.
Mr. Rowe?
And the problem is with the government, I see is the government, they appear to be, not appear to be, they are accepting an unemployment rate approaching 20% as acceptable for 2 or 3 years. And one thing I don't believe should be done is a knee-jerk approach where let's slash X millions of dollars, compounding that problem immediately. One thing, like I said in the beginning, there's a combination of public service and the private sectors. Small business, again, without a substantial or an appropriate, I should say, public service supporting the private sector and small business, because in many communities, that's who support many. But again, I think it's government has a responsibility to create an environment that fosters employment, not unemployment. And it appears this government just accepted that an unemployment rate in a couple of years' time approaching 20% is acceptable.
Okay. Well, we're a little bit over time, so we're going to get to the closing statements now, and we're going to sort of do them in the reverse order. And I'm going to be a little stricter on the timelines here because I have to get up at 3:30 in the morning, so I'll be over there pulling the pot down on the mic. Perfect. So you're welcome to do them there, or you can come up here and for your final remarks, Mr. Hammond.
So first, thank you to Dr. Locke, the Department of Economics and Care, for the opportunity to participate in this panel. It was actually fun. I was 2 hours ago, I probably wouldn't have said that, but here I am. Newfoundland, so I do have prepared statements this time, so there's nothing extemporaneous. Newfoundland and Labrador is in a difficult fiscal situation. Deficits and growing debt are putting pressure on the government's ability to deliver public services. Provincial government data shows, as we've discussed this evening, population decline and even unemployment levels that are going to be near 20% in the next 5 years, within the next 5 years. There's no doubt the fiscal situation of the province is extremely poor and there are structural issues to be dealt with. This will take time, but it should not take too much time. Action is required. But what does that action look like? Many would have us believe that government is responsible for getting us out of this situation. However, there's no fiscal room for the government to spend more as it continues to borrow to meet its current obligations. As large development projects wind down, the provincial economy in the near future will rely upon small businesses for growth. Those small businesses will have to be more innovative, developing new services, new goods, and new markets. This economy needs jobs, and it needs jobs now. What it also needs is people and business creating wealth and ultimately paying taxes to the government. With economic growth, government will have the means to provide the services that will make this a great place to work, play, and raise a family, not only today, but into the future. Economic growth can happen. In the tech sector, for instance, growth is limited only by imagination and ingenuity. In agriculture, if the trend continues towards more local produce, it can be sustained, but it will require more people working the land. In culture and tourism, this past summer was phenomenally successful. However, it was limited to certain regions of the province, and that's a challenge, and that's an issue in and of itself. These are only a select few examples. Certainly there is opportunity in all sectors if we look for it. Economic diversification is a fixture of the current public discourse. This is not new. We've had royal commissions, we've had separate units within government dealing with economic recovery, the works. But right now, economic diversification is being pointed towards as the solution for our fiscal ills. However, economic diversification is not an end goal. It's rather an ongoing process. It takes people to realize there's opportunity available to create additional wealth and jobs, but to assume the risk as well, because there's always risk involved in investing money. More importantly, though, it is not the role of governments to diversify the economy, but rather it's to create the appropriate environment for businesses to start up and grow, which includes, but is not limited to, as I alluded to earlier, a competitive tax regime, an appropriate regulatory system, and a skilled, educated workforce. There's a lot of work to be done, and as a province, everyone will have to do their part. Will it be hard work? Yes, but it's worth it for the place that we call home. Thank you.
Ms. Shortle?
I just want to thank everybody tonight. There's something exciting about, or something that came out of a bad economic situation, I guess, in this province, is that people are clearly concerned about the future of the province, and people are speaking up. And I think there is a shift in the political landscape in this province, because I think as a people we've said, we're not just going to sit by and let someone else tell us what's good for our province. We want to have some input in it. And people are speaking up and they're articulating it, and I think that's very exciting. And there's no doubt that everybody here is concerned about our future. And even as panelists, you know, we're ideologically opposed on some of the solutions, but there is and there has been some common ground. And we've had some really good discussion here tonight and really good questions, which gives us all food for thought. As a president of an organization that represents 65,000 working women and men, we understand the seriousness of our fiscal situation and the challenges it presents. And if we think we can fix these challenges in a couple of years by cutting public services and people, I think we're only trying to make a bad situation worse. Why would we opt for the same solution we have used all the other times we faced a fiscal challenge? It didn't work in the past, and I don't think it's going to work this time. We have the ability to address both the debt and the deficit while at the same time ensuring that we retain the jobs we have and actually work towards creating an economy rich in good jobs, an economy that's fair with less inequality, an economy that's sustainable through environmentally robust policies and investments in our green society. What we can't afford are outdated austerity policies that drive people away, that cause businesses to close and produce less economic activity, which will produce outmigration and unemployment numbers not seen since the moratorium. What we need is a long-term, measured approach that will restore fiscal balance and stability to our economy, and not at the expense of working people, their families, our communities, and our most vulnerable. We have been facing similar challenges in Alberta, although at a much smaller scale, and the provincial government there has opted to maintain public sector investment and increase in some areas. The federal Liberals are doing the same thing, as they recognize that in times of recession, the role of government and the public sector is to stabilize. When the economy recovers, and it will, the government can hand that role back to the private sector economy. Public policy is a plan for what type of society and economy we want for our future and that of our children. And that's what the Newfoundland and Labrador Federation of Labor has been focusing on for many months now. That vision has been missing from many discussions at the government level. How can we assess the risks and deal with the financial realities that will always arise in our economy if government is not ultimately guided by a vision, one that reflects what they have heard from their constituents and understands where they are headed in the long term? The vision has to be more than the deficit and the debt. The budget is not a vision, but a tool to help them get there. And we still haven't heard about their vision yet. Well, we have one, and our vision is about building a strong economy for everyone, and one that includes both the social and economic well-being of the province and the people. And thank you very much for letting us have our say here tonight as well. Thank you.
I really do want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. It's been great to be here with the panelists and questions from the audience, and these are the kinds of discussions that we need to be doing more of in our province. I guess one of the benefits of having a small province and a small population is that we should be able to have more of these kinds of frank discussions. People really need to have an understanding of the trials, the tribulations, the challenges that governments face, because no government in a 4-year cycle, which is an election cycle, is going to be able to right this province. It's not going to happen that way. They can put it on a path there, but then if it's changed the next time somebody else gets in, another government gets in, where are we going? We need to have that long-term vision. We need citizens to buy into what that long-term vision is. And then if citizens are there and it is a good vision and it's a long-term solution, then we need legislation to back it up so another government can't come in and change everything that was going in the right direction. I've seen it too many times in healthcare. We're moving in the right path, we get a great solution, we're going down, we're putting in place with primary healthcare. All of a sudden, a new government comes in and is thrown out to the door. We'll do another consultation, we'll spend another 4 years talking about it, we'll put something in, then another government comes in, throws it out the door again. We can't do that anymore in our province. We really have to learn to work together. And people in our province are really tired of the blame game as well that's happening in politics. They're tired of everything going back to, well, this government did that, that's why we're in this problem. And we're in this problem because the teachers did this, or the nurses did that, or somebody else. Everybody wants to blame somebody else. Nobody wants to come and be part of the solution building. We need to change it. We have to change that. Because what we have right now is a very disillusioned, uninformed population for the most part that truly doesn't understand the gravity of the situation that we're in. And that was quite evident when the province came out and basically said the banks wouldn't loan them any more money. They had to raise revenue in the short term, and here's how they were going to have to do it. And all of a sudden, everybody was crying, screaming, shouting, and it was mass hysteria because people didn't see it coming, because they weren't told, because they weren't given the full picture. They didn't have the correct financials from the previous governments. That shouldn't be allowed to happen. Right? You know, really, when there's another election coming, maybe we need to have the Auditor General come out with a statement that really tells it exactly as it is before each election cycle, so that no government can play this kind of game that we've seen played too many times in the history of our province. It has to change. And the only way we're going to make that change happen is if we, the people, have those conversations, get the education and knowledge we need, and truly work together. And to see the innovation that is in our province, you just need to look in Labrador West for one example, where we've had mining in a really harsh environment for 50 plus years very successfully. Yet we are not showing the innovation that's happened there to allow that kind of mining to happen. We've been talking about a mining center of excellence for years. We're only now getting to the stage where it's actually been looked at. And then you look at the group here at Memorial, the Enactus group, that just won worldwide for their invention of the hydroponic greenhouse that will allow people in any part of our province, including in the far north, to have fresh vegetables, right, throughout the year. You know, when we have a food security issue in our province, which is huge, and a major health crisis because people are not eating enough fruits and vegetables, that's huge. And we should be bringing those bright minds and all these groups to the table like we're doing here tonight and really look into that vision that the province needs to have. But it can't be a 4-year vision. It has to be a long-term vision. Where do we want to be as a province, right, 20 years from now? How are we going to get there? And here's some steps that we're going to do it together. And will we have to reevaluate along the road? Sure, we will. But if we're in it together, we can make it happen. Thank you.
Everybody's come in under time. This is great. Mr. Earl.
Thank you again, Fred, and Dr. Locke again for the opportunity. And like most have said, there's not one of us sitting at this table, or I don't think anybody sitting in this room, that don't realize we have a problem in our province. And it's no good to, as Mayor Olford said, point the finger of blame on the past. We can spend and expend all of our energy on blaming what has happened in the past. We have to look at today, what we want our province to look like tomorrow, and from my perspective, what we want a public service in this province to look like is, again, we can point the finger and blame and say, we can move out public services, but again, to each of those that say that to you, ask them, what would they reduce? Would they remove teachers from classrooms? Because we know the burden that are placed on teachers now, and I don't represent, but we know the burden that are placed on teachers in the classroom now. We have kids having to move desks from one classroom to the next. There's that many children in our classrooms. We have situations now where, just recent, you've heard us talk about with the bus inspections, for example, just an example where highway enforcement officers, we talk about too many, actually we have vacant positions, we don't actually have enough. In our long-term care facility, we have staff that are actually burning out pretty much every day, whether it be licensed practical nurses, PCAs, or LPNs. Again, in our, go down and walk through the correctional facility. We have correctional officers working, like I said, working 24 hours. Explain to me where you can actually take away some of those people without impacting on the services. And again, I challenge anybody to spend the time that I've spent this past summer around rural Newfoundland. And when you see how some of the community has been decimated with just some simple things, removing offices. And again, when you take some of those people out, it impacts on those small businesses. Because again, we believe that, again, small business play a significant role in our provincial economy. So again, we recognize the public sector unions. I just happen to represent one, which is a public and private sector. We recognize there's issues in this province. We're prepared to sit down and have dialogue. But I can tell you, I'm not expecting our members to have pay a greater share than anybody else would pay. They already contributed significantly to this province. So again, I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and I've been quite interested in the comments here tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, so once again, thanks to the CARE group for doing this. Thanks to my panelists. I appreciate the conversation. Thanks again to you folks for caring enough about this, about these issues to be here tonight. Let me be clear. I take no pleasure in being here talking about the fiscal situation in the province. It doesn't make me feel good. I would much prefer to be here talking about something else, right? But we can't bury our heads in the sand. We have a serious, serious fiscal crisis right now. And we can pretend that we can just do exactly what we've been doing for the last 10 years and everything is going to work out just fine. There is no historical precedent for a government getting itself out of a fiscal crisis like this by making no adjustments to spending. There is none. We've seen it in the 90s. The province of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, all did the same thing. Our federal government did the same thing. We have to make a choice as a province. So there's cameras here, but I'm going to get a little political on you. Keep it interesting. I think that we have to be aware that this is a political system. We have a democracy, and our system is political. I think that there was a political misstep by separating the revenue actions that government is going to take and the expenditure actions. Okay? I think what's happened is this government, they're good people. We talk to them all the time. We've spoken with the Premier, we've spoken with Finance Minister. They're good people. They have the best interests of our province at heart. But they have really taken it on the chin since that last budget with the tax increases. They're having a hard time. And they are politicians, and they don't want to go through that again. Right? So the danger that we have now as a public is that they're going to lose the political will to do what needs to be done, and that is to make adjustments to spending. Right? So it's up to us, it's up to the public, it's up to special interest groups to encourage the government to do what's necessary to lead us out of this fiscal situation. If there was ever a time in the history of Newfoundland and Labrador when we needed leadership from our politicians that was bold and decisive, that time is now. So you need to go back and you need to encourage your politicians to do what needs to be done. Tell them that you want them to lead us out of this fiscal crisis, and lead us to better pastures. Thank you.
Well, that concludes our panel discussion for this evening. Thank you very much for coming. Dr. Locke, thanks for inviting me, and to our panelists once again. Thanks for taking part, and feel free to contact our station anytime you want to discuss this. Obviously, there are several venues to keep the discussion going, and I'm sure there'll be lots to talk about in the coming weeks. Good night, everyone. Thanks.